Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. This is The Progress Element and I'm Isha. Today I will be talking about the true cost of attending Minerva. There are a lot of videos and content out there about the financial aid package that Minerva provides. I also made a video about the structure of the financial aid package and how to apply it for financial aid. I will leave that video in the description box below for you guys to check out. And just to recap, the financial aid at Minerva consists of a scholarship, a loan, and work study. However, Minerva costs a lot more than what it looks like on paper and on the financial aid package. This is not to say that Minerva is providing misleading information. It is just an honest fact that in most colleges, the cost of attendance is much more than just tuition and room and board. And usually you will not be able to access this information unless you talk to a Minervan. Well, I'm a Minerva student and I can help you with that. So when I first joined Minerva, I did not know that there were going to be so many costs, and it can really become a burden for a low-income student and for a student who does not have the resources to manage their finances well. So I want to give you guys a heads up and provide you with accurate information about what I had to face and the expenses that I had to incur, and hopefully some tips with how you can deal with that. So this is a realistic outlook on what Minervans spend their money on. So for starters, let's start with their basic expenses. The basic expenses of joining a school like Minerva, where you travel to a different city each semester, is that you need to have a passport and you need to have visas and you need to have flights. So all of these costs are costs that you have to deal with. These are not taken into account in your financial aid package, so you do not have a scholarship that covers your flights or your visas or anything of that sort. So usually when you are at Minerva, you are traveling from city to city each semester, and during the summer you might also travel to a different country, or you might decide to stay somewhere and your housing is not covered over the summer. So you have to pay for the flights to and from a place. And this can be really expensive if you're flying from one country to another, and since most Minervans are international students, they are flying from one country to another. The second cost, that is a basic cost for Minerva, is that of a laptop. So when you first join a Minerva, you will understand that all our classes are online, so you have to have a well-functioning laptop. So Minerva has some requirements for the device that you can use. A lot of students just tend to use the device that they already have, but if your device does not meet the minimum criteria, then you will have to buy a device. There's also a chance that your device may be faulty or that it may need some repairing, or you may need to replace it at some point. So this happened to me where my laptop broke down, and if that happens, you will need to have money to invest in a new laptop. Minerva does provide loaner laptops, but those are not for a semester long, so you will need to get a new laptop at some point. Next, let's talk about living expenses. So the first thing in living expenses is the housing costs. One thing that you need to account for is a housing deposit. I believe it was $1,000 when I joined Minerva, so you have to give this cost up front, and I believe it is given back to you after 4 years, so it is reimbursed unless this deposit is taken out of your account because you damaged property or did something of that sort, but you do have to present this amount in addition to your tuition and other fees. So this is a amount that every student has to pay. The second amount is that of housing. So like I mentioned, in summer there is no housing, so if you do not plan on going back home and you don't want to splurge money on flights, you will have to spend money on housing. Housing is cheaper than most places in the cities that we live in. So in San Francisco, we have relatively cheap housing, but this is relatively cheap, meaning that it is really expensive in third world country terms or in any developing country currency, or even in American currency, honestly. And San Francisco is the city that we go to first. And in addition to that, sometimes you may need to find housing in between different cities. So for example, I was in London in the fall and I had to be in Seoul in the spring. And my visa got delayed, so unless I waited for the visa in London, I could not get to Seoul. I still didn't get the visa, but that's beside the point. Anyway, I had to stay in London and my housing ended at the end of the year, and I still had 10 days of winter break. So if I Had my flight to Seoul, I could spend those 10 days in the res hall in Seoul, but since I didn't have the visa, I would have to pay for the housing costs, and that was a very difficult cost to manage, and I wish I had been told earlier on that this is a possibility, that you are not guaranteed visas, and a lot of times these costs can just come at you. And so this is something that you need to account for if you're stranded in a country, especially in COVID. A lot of students were stranded in Buenos Aires. I remember that Minerva did pay, I think, a part of their housing, but not fully. And obviously that was a one-time thing. I don't know if they will do that in the future. So if you are a student on financial aid, you usually have work study, which is used to cover living expenses. And one of the big living expenses is the setup costs for any city. So once you first move into the dorms in any city, you need to buy things for your dorm room. Depending on the dorm room, there are different things that you need. I will talk about San Francisco because that is the first city that you go to. You will have to buy bedding, so you will have to buy, your bed sheets and your comforter and all that. You will have to buy stuff for the room, so room decor or, rugs, your toiletries, including your washing and cleaning supplies. There are some communal supplies, your utensils for eating, a kettle, maybe a water purifier or water filter, and all of these costs you have to take care of. And obviously these are not mandatory, but a lot of students do like to invest in little things when they move into a place because you're essentially living there for a few months, so you need to have some things. And unless you're carrying these things with you, you will have to spend money on them. One thing that has changed since I joined Minerva is that we did not have this the year before, but this year they accounted for the city setup costs in the financial aid package. So they tell you you should have this amount of dollars for city setup costs. I will tell you what I got. I think they told me $250 is what I should have to start in a city. And this is because when you first get to a city, you don't have work study money. You will have to work for 2 weeks or something to get the money. So you should have this money when you land in a new country, so you are able to set up and buy groceries and live in those few days. So other living costs I can think of are food, laundry, transportation, cell phone bills, clothing, and that's about it. So first let's talk about food. Food really depends on the person, but Minerva does not have a college meal plan, so there's no meals that are delivered to you. You really have to take care of your own meals. And I don't think people understand how difficult this can be because you are living on work study, and if you're in an expensive city, you really have to budget to minimize the amount that you spend on food. If you don't have a lot of money, I would say don't eat out. Clothing also, you might require some new clothing depending on the weather. You have to buy this clothing. If you're on a tight budget, I highly recommend thrifting. As for cell phone bills, these differ by country. Usually your friends will tell you the cheapest plan. I will also be making videos about city-specific costs and things that I would suggest. So I will suggest like the cheapest things in those cities, and you can check those videos out. But usually you get the cheapest phone plan, but that is still, a bunch of money, like $20-30 a month, depending on which area of the world you're in. Other than that, for transportation, the costs differ depending on how much you travel within the city. Obviously, don't take Ubers and cabs, take the public transportation and walk a lot of places to save yourself some money. Last but not least, there is the laundry cost, and this depends on the city. So when I was in London, we just had a washing machine, but in Berlin and San Francisco, you have to pay for laundry. I had to pay, I think, around $2.25 for one round, so for just washing, and then the same for drying. So that cost really adds up, especially if you are trying to track how much money you spend. It's easy to forget little costs like that, and usually you can work with them in your work study, but for students who are really on a tight budget, this can become problematic if you are also planning on saving up some of that work study money for your tuition and whatnot. So this is something that's important to take into account. Living costs are also tricky because different people have different types of living standards, and I think this is one thing that not enough people talk about, is how different life is at Minerva or at any other big college, especially when you're an international student, is that Minerva is not a big college, by the way, but at any college abroad, is that there's a completely different lifestyle depending on what income bracket you fall in. So you will see some of your classmates moving in and out of countries, traveling all around. And if you're on a tight budget, you won't be able to do that. So don't just assume that if you see Minervans traveling to 20 different countries, you will also be doing that, because you probably won't. You will probably be struggling to make ends meet. And that's completely fine. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think I learned budgeting skills and living independently and living on a small budget at Minerva really well. Like, I became really resourceful because I have mastered the art of getting free food. At least I had in my first year, and I will be making videos about that. So grocery shopping for really cheap, and also just getting free food. So you need to really be resourceful if you want to have enough money for your next expenses. Next up, we have health costs. So a health insurance is mandatory wherever you go. And this is something that a lot of students, when they sign up for Minerva, they have no idea, because this is a separate bill. And this is not accounted for in your financial aid package, because that is your tuition and other costs. So usually your health insurance is around $500 per semester, so that is something that every student has to pay, and you really need to account for, unless you have another health insurance and you can prove to Minerva that you don't need this one, which is a tricky process. I have never been through that because I didn't have it, but take this into account. Also, if you fall sick, and something happens, we don't want it to, but something can happen in a different city, then there can be major costs depending on where you are, depending on their healthcare system. So for example, please don't fall sick in America, because it can cost you a lot of money out of pocket, even with insurance. So this is a risk that any traveler or any tourist or student takes when they come to this country. But this is also something you should keep in mind if you have a serious health condition that the insurance doesn't cover, is that you will need to pay a lot of money to just go see the doctor and to get your medicine and whatnot. You do get some benefits with the health insurance, but they do not cover everything. So please do your research. Another important thing that I want to talk about are taxes. So a lot of people don't know that you are taxed on both your scholarship and your work study money. And a lot of this depends on what country you're coming from. Let's first talk about work study. So the work study is part of your financial aid package. If you're a student, that needs money. And basically you're doing this internship for Minerva and getting paid bi-weekly. But usually there is a deduction from this work study money, and at the end of the year during tax season, so this year it was May, you file for your taxes and they tell you how much you owe them or whether you get a refund. A lot of my friends got a refund, because they had tax treaties with their countries. For me, I always have to pay. So for each work study money stipend that I get, I get money cut for taxes, and then I also have to pay on top of that for taxes at the end of the year. And this is a huge amount. I will not be obviously sharing that, but this is a big amount, and I think that's something to take into account, because if you are expecting this work study money to be all yours, that's not true. America taxes everyone, and you have to pay those taxes. Another tax is the scholarship tax. So if you have a scholarship, which you probably do if you have financial aid, you will have to pay a tax on it unless your country has a treaty with the US. This one is really tricky, and I have found a lot of trouble with it, because last year I did not have to pay it. And I was told that my country has a treaty, and this is something that does not apply to me. I know a lot of people struggled because of it, because they had no idea that they would need to pay so much money just because it was a tax on their scholarship. Like, this is something that does not make sense, but it is a thing. But this year, I'm told by Minerva that that was not true, and their partner that, calculates his taxes, and that we don't have a treaty that applies, and I have to pay the scholarship tax, and this is a huge amount. So this is something that has troubled me for a long time, and part of the reason why I'm making this video, because I see a lot of students coming into Minerva, having this idea that they will get great scholarships and it's all free. Minerva does provide great scholarships, as I said before, but there are definitely costs, and this is why I'm making this video, for full disclosure, things that you will need to account for. And you may not have all of these expenses depending on what country you're coming from, but please think about this. Please talk to other people from your country and ask me any questions that you have. And if I can help you, I will. Those are all the expenses that I could think of at the moment. If there are more expenses that you have in mind and you think I should mention, or If you're also a Minervan and you have something to add, please comment down below. If I have other things that I can think of, I will also leave them in the comments so people know what they're signing up for. But also I would say that despite all of this, I still encourage you, highly encourage you to apply for Minerva, because I do think it gives an amazing scholarship. And once you have a financial aid package, and if you do have some backing from your family and they're able to contribute a little bit, it can really go a long way and help you stay at Minerva. Obviously, it won't be the easiest, and for some people, they may need to look for sponsorships and they may need to look for external help. If you're in a really extreme financial position and you can't even fund your tickets, that's something you need to look for. But there are also other scholarships that may help to cover that. And it may be difficult keeping up with your classmates, eating out and having fun because you're traveling and you really want to do those things, but you financially can't. But this is life, and wherever you go, you are probably not going to be the billionaire that's able to spend as much money as they want. So Minerva really does give you a realistic perspective on life. Last but not least, there are many ways to finance things apart from your work study. Obviously, you need to learn how to budget, and that's one skill that is so important. But you can also try and find opportunities over the summer. You can intern and you can have jobs so that you legally, please, but you can do that to earn more money and to finance your studies and maybe pay back some of your loan. And I just wanted to mention this because I think this has not been talked about enough, and this is the true cost of attending Minerva. It's not just, the scholarship and just paying tuition and residential fees and that's that. These are all costs that are very real, and they may not mean much to someone who's not on financial aid, but I know me being someone who is on financial aid, I cared about all these costs, and I was, I guess, lucky enough to connect with Minervans before I got in, so I knew about most of them. But most of you who are thinking about Minerva may not know about this, so this is just me taking a step to make it easier to get this information to you. If you have more questions, feel free to let me know, and I will be happy to help you. And I will be making a lot more videos about Minerva, so stay tuned. Bye, thank you.